This is going to be one of the most important parts of the game. So we already have the gameplay where the aliens are moving. We can also shoot, but we have no way of stopping them. And once they reach the bottom, then it's game over and we've actually lost. So we need a way to prevent the aliens reaching the bottom, and that's going to be to shoot at them with our red ball that we have, the red projectile that's coming off of our ship. So we need to be able to also detect to make sure that if this element that's containing the red ball, which has a class of Fire Me, whenever it hits one of the aliens, to detect that if there's a collision taking place. And the way that we can detect collisions is we know that each one of these is a square. So even though this one is represented as a circle, it's also still represented as square in JavaScript because this is an element. So it's got all of the different points where it's got the top left point. So that's going to be the 0, 0 point. And then it's got the top right point. It's got the bottom right point. And then the bottom left point. And the aliens have the same thing. So each element has that. And we're going to check to see if there's crossover from any one of these points to the other element. And the best place to do this is as we're looping through the aliens, so we don't have to loop through them another time. When we're going through the update, we can also check to see if a collision has taken place. So as we go through here, we've already selected the element, the alien element, and we can check at this point to see if there's crossover between the alien and Fire Me element. So checking to see if is collide, and we'll create that function. We're going to pass in the two objects. We're passing in the element, which is the current alien. So as we loop through, we're going to account for each one of the elements that has a class of alien. And then Fire Me element is the only one that's got the projectile, and that's the one that we're moving up here as well. And in order to account for this, we need to consider where it's moving and its position. So we're checked to see Fire Me's position as well as where its top left and its corner position is. So we're checking to see that, and all of that is going to be done within a function called isCollide. And if there is a collision, we're going to run the block of code for the collision, but for now we're just output into the console that we've got a hit. So we have the ability to check through each one of the aliens as well as the projectile element and see if there's any crossover. So now let's add in our function for checking to see if a collision has taken place. And we're going to use that bounding client rectangle value that we saw earlier. So we've got our Fire Me object. And if we get bounding client rectangle, so using the same method where we got the positions of the container, we can see we've got a left position, a right position, a top position, and a bottom position. So if we check this element, and then we do the same thing for each one of the aliens as we're looping through, and if we check the bottom position of the first rectangle against the top position of the other rectangle, we know if there's any crossover, or if the top position of the first one is crossing over the bottom of the alien, then we know that there's been a hit on the vertical side. I know this is fairly complex to explain, so the best thing to do is to just try that out, and I'll show you how it works within the code format. So we're passing in the two parameters, the element and the Fire Me object. And this is also going to make it more dynamic. As we know, this one's always Fire Me, B is always the same element, but because we want the consistency, in order to create it more dynamic, if we add in more projectiles, then we're going to have flexibility on checking the collision detection. As well, if we want to check collision on any other elements, we can just simply add it into the formula and check if there is a collision. So we're going to get our bounding client rectangle, and then also another one for the B object, the B element, and taking B, passing in that same method, bounding client rectangle. So now we've got all of this information. We've got its essential, where it's positioned, how wide it is, X, Y position of both of the elements. So what we're going to do to check, we're going to check to see if there's no overlap. And if there is no overlap, we'll negate that. and that will turn into if there is overlap. So let's work out this formula, and it is going to be rather long. So first we're looking at the bottom of rectangle A, and we're checking to see if it's less than the top of rectangle B. We're also going to check the opposite. So this way we're going to actually know if there's any overlap. So we're checking the top of rectangle A against the bottom of rectangle B. So this is only going to paint part of the picture because this is going to be checking on the horizontal. So we can also pass in and we can see that if the projectile is over top of one of the aliens horizontally or vertically, then this is going to come back, and now because we've negated it, it will it'll come back as true if there is overlap. So we also need to look at the horizontal, of course. And this formula is going to be looking to see rectangle A right side is less than rectangle B left side. So if there's overlap there, and then we also need to check the opposite. So we need to check rectangle A left, see if there's overlap, and check to see if this is larger than, and actually this should be larger than. So we're checking to see if it's greater than rectangle B right side. If there's overlap on the horizontal, as well as we're checking to see the overlap on the vertical. So I think we're ready to try that. So we saw that as it passed through those elements, the hit was registered. I don't know if you saw that because we are moving rather quickly, but you see that whenever it passes through those elements, it registers the hit. So next we need to take some type of action if this hit takes place. And we'll show you how to do that in the upcoming lesson. For this, make sure that you can check to see if there's a collision on two different elements. And if there is, then we're going to return back true. And we can try that function where we're passing in the two parameters, and we do have two. We've got one called myShip, as well as we've got the container. So we pass in, and we know that obviously the myShip is on top of the container, so the collide is coming back as true. So you can try that for yourself. And if you take myShip and the other object that we have, the other element that we're connected to is the start button. So we can check to see if the myShip is on top of the start button, if there is a collision. And so this one comes back as false because there's no overlap there. And you can try it on various elements on your page manually within the console if you want to check out the functionality of the collision detection.